Working on a creative writing assignment together results in a complicated relationship between a teacher and his promising student. Cairo Sweet is a recently 18-year-old senior high school girl who lives alone in her wealthy family's mansion in Level Hill, located in Tennessee, while her attorney's parents are permanently abroad on a business trip. For Cairo, turning 18 was supposed to turn her into a significant person, but she was greatly disappointed when she realized that she was still unremarkable, despite having turned into an adult. Never in her whole life did Cairo leave the town, not even for a while. Literature is her only solace in solitude, and writing is her only means of escaping her reality. Cairo is a lonely girl who longs to be loved, but one day she met another writer, a teacher named Jonathan Miller. The first time she met Miller was when she first entered Miller's creative writing class and found him by the board. They introduced themselves to each other and had a small conversation before Cairo's friend, Winnie, came in. Since they still have an hour before class starts, Cairo and Winnie left to get some food, and as soon as they left, Miller checked the books Cairo brought with her. A fellow teacher, Boris Fillmore, entered the classroom and playfully read Cairo's books, which are mostly erotica and romance. Miller was surprised but still impressed when Boris showed him one of the books Cairo had brought, Apostrophes and Ampersands, a book that Miller wrote, and Cairo was the only one who checked the book out of the library. After work, Miller went back home to find his wife Beatrice working on another book, and he proudly talked about the student who read his book. The married couple sensually whispered to each other erotic phrases they read in books, but the romantic moment stopped when Beatrice received a call. The next day, Miller was sitting by the bleachers when he saw Cairo coming from the woods. Cairo approached the two teachers and joked around with them. When Cairo went inside the school, she was about to approach Winnie when she found her trying to seduce Fillmore into letting her join his physics class. Cairo talked to Winnie, amused by her friend's boldness. Later that day, they were hanging out in Cairo's room, and Cairo was complaining about the college admission essay she had to pass to Yale University. She had to write an essay about her achievements, but besides going to become the valedictorian of her high school, there was nothing remarkable about Cairo, and she feels as if she is unqualified. Winnie suggested making a creative piece about an intimate relationship between a student and a teacher. Cairo was flustered and curious, as she had no idea about things such as relationships and intimacy, so Winnie decided to tell her about her desire to give her virginity to a teacher like Fillmore, despite being a lesbian who never fails to show her attraction to Cairo. Winnie told Cairo she could use Miller as an inspiration. She saw the looks Miller was giving Cairo, and she believes that their creative writing teacher is attracted to Cairo. This piqued Cairo's interest, and later on, when she was reading alone, she started having the feeling of yearning. And at class the next day, Cairo kept on glancing at Miller, who was staring at her, and she realized she craved his attention. Miller was distributing papers to the students, and when he handed Cairo hers, he discreetly whispered to her to meet up after class. After class, Miller was dancing around while waiting for Cairo, and he was embarrassed when he saw her watching him dance. Miller asked Cairo about the essay she had to do for Yale and learned that Cairo wanted to enroll at Yale for its high rate of literacy. Miller then recited phrases he'd read from a book and gave an assignment to Cairo to help her out in her Yale essay. He wanted Cairo to write a story in the style of her favorite author, which he believes could be the highlight of Cairo's portfolio submission to Yale. Cairo talked about the book Miller wrote and expressed her interest in it. When she recited phrases from Apostrophes and Ampersands, Miller was touched and surprised that she even memorized them. He talked about how boring his life is, and Cairo noticed how uninspired he is. Their conversation was cut off when a grumpy and hungry Winnie came into the room. That night, Miller was in a pub with Beatrice and Fillmore and Winnie, who works in that pub, taking their orders. The topic of their conversation was Cairo, and Miller could only say good things about her. Cairo is extremely talented, and Miller believes she can become an amazing writer. The group was having fun conversing about writing when Beatrice killed the mood by commenting on Miller's lackluster writing skills. She thinks being a teacher suits Miller more than being a writer because he lacks the ambition to write new material after having written only one book that wasn't even that good for her. Cairo attended a calm and formal hangout between book lovers where they had to listen to one or more people reciting poetry with a piano playing in the background to add to the ambiance. Cairo wasn't one to attend such formal meetings, but she was hoping that Miller was going to attend, and she craved to be near him. After the poetry reading, Cairo and Miller stood by the porch, sharing a cigarette, as Cairo relished the feeling of being in Miller's presence. The next day at the school field, Cairo gave Miller and Fillmore coffees and got some biscuits that Fillmore had made. Cairo encouraged Fillmore to get a logo and sell his biscuits to raise money with the help of the baseball team. She offered to get Winnie to make the logo, as she was good at it, and Fillmore left Cairo and Miller in a happy mood. Cairo sat beside Miller, and the two enjoyed smoking together. Inside the school, Cairo and Winnie were about to leave when Cairo mentioned having to stop by Miller's class. When they entered Miller's class, they saw him hurriedly packing his things up and learned that he was going on a weekend vacation with his wife. Cairo asked for Miller's approval before she started on the assignment, which he gave her. She wanted to write her story in the style of Henry Miller. Jonathan Miller was speechless because Henry Miller is famous for being a provocative writer. However, Cairo explained that Henry is a good example for her because of his decadence, total disregard for literary etiquette, and destruction of convention. Miller was reluctant to approve, as using Henry Miller's style could be controversial, but finally relented when Cairo told her that a story would only be more interesting if it was controversial. As soon as Miller left, Winnie started teasing Cairo about Miller when Fillmore came into the room. He said that he agrees with Cairo's idea of him making a logo and selling his biscuits. Cairo briefed Winnie about it, and the latter asked for Fillmore's phone so she could get his number and just text her the logo specs. Cairo told Winnie to call her phone using Fillmore's phone so he could get her number too, but she couldn't find her phone anywhere. Cairo and Winnie moved to leave, and Fillmore awkwardly asked for his phone back when Winnie hides it inside her undergarment. Miller was reading a book at home, waiting for Beatrice to finish her job before they left for their weekend vacation, when he received a call. He answered it and learned it was Cairo who was calling her using a telephone, asking for her phone back. Miller offered to drop by her house to give her the phone personally, and Cairo agreed before dropping the phone. It was raining when Miller reached Cairo's home, and he could only stare in admiration as Cairo walked out looking so beautiful and elegant. Cairo stood closer to Miller, and they shared a kiss under the rain. After the kiss, Cairo had a sudden motivation to start her story, which was about an intimate relationship between a teacher and his student, just like what Winnie suggested. Miller, on the other hand, could not stop thinking about the kiss as he tried to work. His weekend vacation with his wife was canceled, as Beatrice still had a lot of work to do. Beatrice noticed the look on Miller's face and was distracted by it, so she asked him to leave, and it irked Miller. Miller decided to go to the shed, which was turned into an office, and check out the short story Cairo had emailed him. He printed it and read it, his hungry eyes eating up the erotic words on the paper. As he read, Miller couldn't help but imagine that the main characters in Cairo's short story were him and Cairo. He grew aroused at the thought of him doing things in Cairo, and eventually unzipped his pants to give himself pleasure as he read the short erotica written by his favorite student. When Monday came, Miller confronted Cairo about the story she wrote and told her to choose another author as the story she sent him was inappropriate. He asked why Cairo wrote her material, and the latter confessed that it was about them. But Miller disapproved of the idea of him and his student having an intimate relationship like what Cairo is implying in her story. He refused to indulge Cairo's desire to have something more than just being a friendly teacher and student. Cairo was offended by his rejection, but still insisted that Miller wanted her as much as she wanted him. She assumed that Miller was simply scared of the consequences if they were to be caught together. She asked Miller how he feels and what he thinks of her. Miller claims he just sees Cairo as an incredibly talented student of his, and that he feels foolish for having trusted Cairo to write a proper story using Henry Miller's style. Cairo was angry as she chastised Miller for blurring the lines and then expecting her to see the boundary when she crossed it. Miller threatened to fail Cairo and reminded her that he is her teacher and she is just his student. Anything more than that is nothing but a misconception that Cairo had to shoulder alone. However, Miller almost gave in to his desire when he leaned in closer to Cairo as if to kiss her, but he gathered himself together and pulled back. Cairo's demeanor suddenly changed, and she dared him to fail him. She warned him that if he does so, There will be a cost so high that it will devour him until he is as small as he pretends to be. Cairo insulted Miller one last time before walking out of the classroom. Cairo slipped her story into the in-school mailbox to send it to the vice principal, Joyce Manor, before going back home, where she and Winnie were drunk together to distract her. Cairo encouraged Winnie to send Fillmore a drunk text so he could imagine all the things she was doing drunkenly. Meanwhile, Miller told Beatrice about Cairo's inappropriate story, and Beatrice just dismissed it, saying it's his fault anyway for allowing a student to run with Henry Miller. Beatrice requested to see the story Cairo wrote, and she teased Miller when she realized that it was practically Cairo's love letter for Miller. She made her husband recite Cairo's story as she straddled him. But before they could go any further, Fillmore suddenly entered their home without permission, reminding them to lock the door next time. Minutes later, Fillmore was sitting on Miller and Beatrice's couch when Winnie texted him. Cairo was telling Winnie what to text Fillmore, and when Fillmore stopped texting back as he was busy chatting with Beatrice, Cairo decided to use Winnie's attraction towards her to her advantage. She seduced Winnie, and the two of them were topless as they had a steamy makeout. Cairo took a picture of them while they were making out and told Winnie to send it to Fillmore. Vice Principal Joyce Manor had seen the story Cairo wrote her, and the implications were as clear as the day. Beatrice received a call from Manor and gave the phone to Miller as he was being summoned to the vice principal's office. Miller told Beatrice that Manor got Cairo's story. But again, Beatrice dismissed her worry as the story was just that, a story written by a delusional student. But when Miller continued to worry, Beatrice asked if something really did happen between Cairo and Miller, and the latter was stammering as he denied it. Beatrice warned him that it wasn't only his job he might lose if she found out something happened between her husband and his student. Vice Principal Manor interrogated both Cairo and Miller, and the two shared their own sides of the story. In the end, there was nothing Miller could do to defend himself. He is the adult in the situation, and he wasn't responsible enough to make it clear that he and Cairo are nothing more than just a teacher and student in the first place. Fillmore confronted Miller about the situation and was disappointed when he discovered that Miller had actually fallen in love with Cairo. He expressed his disappointment. However, Miller turned the situation around by accusing Fillmore of staring at the pictures Winnie sent him. But they are not the same because, for one, Fillmore knew his boundaries and immediately deleted the pictures. Fillmore was upset at Miller's attempt to pass the blame on him when he hadn't even done anything wrong, and accused Miller of making him collateral damage before walking away in disgust. Miller had been suspended and got into an argument with Beatrice, who didn't seem to care enough about her husband's well-being. Beatrice told him it was his fault that he was in the situation he was in. Even if he didn't get intimate with Cairo, he can't deny that there was indeed something between them, which doesn't erase the fact that he's a teacher who had an affair with a student. Miller finally let out all his repressed anger on his wife, and Beatrice just chastised him for blaming everyone but himself. Meanwhile, Winnie confronted Cairo for using her to ruin Miller's friendship with Fillmore. But Cairo showed no empathy to her friend and stated that Winnie should be proud because she played everything out exactly like Winnie imagined. Winnie told her it wasn't a game, and Cairo agreed. The mess she caused is not a game, but her greatest achievement. Cairo stood on the bed and read her now-finished college admission essay for Yale University. As Cairo reads her essay, the scene shows Miller sitting in front of his laptop. Despite being most affected by the mess he was in, Miller seemed to have gained the motivation to write new material. In Cairo's essay, she opened up about her loneliness and longing for love. She admits that there has been an error in her way of reaching and wanting love. She questioned if that was what it feels like to be an adult, and she doesn't know whether or not to be grateful for the experience and knowledge she gained along the way. There is no excuse for the choices she'd made, but she can say that she had grown from the human ruins of a madman's love.